We are back with another author chat. Today, I am sitting down with Morgan Dante to chat about Hallowed Be Thy Name, a queer romance about an unofficiated Catholic priest and a demon. There's a lot to dig in with here. Super excited. So let's go ahead and just dig right in. What was the inspiration for Hallowed Be Thy Name?
So there were a couple of inspirations. Like, probably one of them was supernatural, definitely the kind of like Americana, like road trip vibes. And also, my favorite character in Supernatural is Crowley. So I love like the sassy demon. So that was definitely an influence. There was also the Exorcist TV show, which is based on the book slash movie, and it's really good. The main character is a gay priest, but there's a part where they go to a convent where the nuns are doing exorcism, and the nuns do it like in a different way where they show like compassion toward the fallen angel that's possessing the person, and they kind of take like this like sympathetic, compassionate approach. And it was interesting because on one hand, it is kind of done in like a gendered way because it's like, oh, it's the nuns doing this. But I don't know. It kind of made me think about like a different way because I'm really big about like the idea of like, what would it be like to be a fallen angel? This idea that you were in heaven and like you had God's love, but then you lost it. And so that was a pretty big influence in kind of how I like wanted to explore how exorcisms function.
Yeah, I definitely picked up the supernatural vibes. I watched that
Yeah.
show and Crowley's great. Like, what a throwback to me because I haven't watched it recently. But I really love that you took the two main sort of media forms and put your own twist on it. And that's really cool. I wasn't familiar with the Exorcist other media that you referenced. So that's really cool. And I love that, someone can be familiar with all or none of the source material, right? And you still put your own twist on it. So one thing that I thought was really neat, like I grew up Catholic, so I knew a little bit of the source
Yeah.
material that you're referencing in this book, but not like a ton of it because I haven't done like the super deep dives. So I'm wondering how much of the material did you keep true to like actual theology, if that's the right word, and how much did you like supplement with your own twists or take?
So I also grew up Catholic, but because my family on my dad's side is Irish Italian, but it was also kind of like we're Catholic because we say we're Catholic. It wasn't necessarily like we went to mass all the time, but I did do research and I tried to be faithful to the experiences of a Catholic priest. But of course, Sebastian's like experiences aren't really what call like quote unquote traditional experiences of a Catholic priest. So there are like some liberties made. Mostly to do my research, I did a lot of research and I read this book called No One Taught Me How to Be a Man by Shannon T. Kearns, who is actually first open trans man priest in the old Catholic priesthood. And I also read a lot about his blog where he's really big on like helping people in like how, faith should be a positive thing, that spreads like compassion and justice and not hate. And so I kind of approached the idea of kind of like what I would call like tender masculinity, and like an emphasis on compassion. What I find like interesting as a queer Catholic person is kind of like the inherent contradiction of it. Because of course, like the Pope and the church, they're very like to be a Catholic, you cannot disobey the Catholic Church. Technically, if you like disobey them in any way, you can't really call yourself Catholic. So it's kind of like that inner struggle that I find really interesting. So like Sebastian would technically be considered like a heretic, but I would also consider him, to be like, I mean, very, very pious and like a very good person. Those kind of themes like really resonate with me, and I kind of want to explore all those.
I think it's really, meaningful that you've taken this source material. And obviously there is like the, doctrine from, the church leadership, but each person is going to have their own experience with it. I really love that you read like the book and the blog from like an openly trans priest. That's really cool. And I can absolutely tell that you did your research writing this story. So it very much came across in a great way where there was no point where I felt like, oh, the liberties were taken here, which is great because
Yeah.
obviously you can take liberties. But I feel like if a reader picks it up, that's when I kind of lose the illusion. And I didn't at any point in reading your book.
Yeah, because I've definitely read like certain books where it like I can tell the person might have like come from like a Protestant background or they're not really familiar with it, which, isn't a bad thing, but I guess you can like kind of tell like I can kind of tell like, okay, this person isn't really familiar with Catholicism. So I kind of like I wanted to like bring the perspective of someone who is.
Yeah, absolutely. That's super it very much comes through. And kind of a related question, what was the hardest part of writing Hallowed Be Thy Name? I'm sure that there's obviously a lot that you put into it, so I'm curious from your perspective what was challenging for you.
So there were 2 things. One was, mostly finding the discipline to, like, sit down and carve out time because when I wrote it, I was moving, and so it was kind of like a, like, big transitional part of my life, so it was just like, "Okay, I gotta sit down and, do a writing session and write these words." So that was one thing, and another thing is with a lot of my books, I don't really like doing, like, big ensemble casts, and while Hallowed Be Thy Name, there's not really like a huge amount of characters. The scenes where, there's a bunch of other characters or like the ones during the exorcisms and there's like all these different characters and kind of balancing them and their personalities. Those are the scenes that I probably find the hardest.
Absolutely. And then there's a lot of people to factor around. It's like who's doing what and in what moment, making sure like the continuity works. That when you're writing a scene with like two people or one person, you don't have to necessarily worry about that. So I totally get that. And I really commend you for writing even while you were moving. And I feel like that is something that I'm starting to see as like a more someone who's writing novels more, just sit down and force yourself to get something down. Obviously, not every day. Sometimes things are gonna come up, but if you wanna maintain consistency in this craft, you can't let something like a move completely derail all of your progress. So, I really commend you for that because I love to just skip and be like, "I'll get to it later," and then it's like, "Nope, I gotta sit down and carve out the time to do it."
Yeah, and it's not easy. It feels like it was like a blur, but I mean, I did get it done.
It's always a little bit of a blur, right?
Yeah, I always make a joke about how I enter, like, this fugue state, like, I don't know, when I write and people ask me, like, these details, like, when I'm editing it, I'm like, "I don't remember writing this."
I know you just mentioned that you don't love doing large ensemble casts and you do a little bit smaller, tighter casts. So I'm wondering which character do you identify with most from Hallowed Be Thy Name and why?
I would definitely say Sebastian, just, being a queer Catholic person and kinda dealing with all the contradictions and also kinda like the grief and the isolation he goes through and kinda like the struggle with his identity, as a Catholic man, I feel like I resonate with a lot.
Yeah, I love that that comes through and the struggle with the identity, and I feel like that comes across really well in the book, and yet we spent the right amount of time
Yeah.
on the exploration of the interiority and also the plot moving the story forward. It felt like it had a really lovely balance, and in the prose as well, it was like the whether we're thinking at the larger level, the whole book, or the scene level, it felt like it was a good balance between those. It was a really lovely read.
Thank you. Yeah, because like I do really like, like navel gazing and like looking into what makes the character tick, but I also am very like conscious of okay, we're building toward this and I don't like to like linger too long and basically like okay, I've made my point, so I need to move forward.
Absolutely, and it's so interesting as we're writing stories, we know what we're trying to convey. We know what's going on in these characters' heads, like, we are these people in some way, and some authors initially overly explain things. They worry with trusting their reader to, like, get it. It's like, "No, I get it," and also understanding that, like, there is no book in which we need to hear every last nanosecond of their lives. There's always gonna be a little bit of space and kind of, like, where do we cut that line of like we need to trust our reader to fill in some of the gaps that are just naturally going to be there, and I feel like yeah, we kept the story moving forward. There was no point that it like dragged down because of that, so you got that on lock.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and it takes a lot of practice knowing, okay, am I being too like coy? Am I not revealing enough and therefore it's going to be confusing? Or am I like explaining too much? I need to pull back. But usually that gets resolved in the editing stage.
So Hallowed Be Thy Name is in the third person. Can you share a little bit more about what you like about writing in the third person, or why you went with that perspective for the story?
Third person is just the perspective I'm most comfortable with. I think it just comes most naturally to me. Sometimes I'll write in first person. Like when I wrote Providence Girls, I tried to do like a traditional third person narrative, but it just wasn't working. And then I made it epistolary. So then it became first person. And that really works. So sometimes like third person like doesn't resonate with me and I'll go with a different thing. But mostly I just feel like third person is easiest for me. I find for first person, like I know some people dislike it. I don't dislike it, but I find it kind of like deceptively harder to write because it is a lot of okay, I'm in like the character's head and like I have to like really convey that strongly in a way that I feel like can be like more like precise than third person where you can play around a little bit more.
I think it's interesting that third person is where you gravitate. I've so far only written in first person, and I feel like for me, I write in that way because it's easier, because I feel like it's easier to share what's going on through the character. But
Yeah.
I'm wondering when you're writing your stories, do you envision things like do you feel like you're watching something unfold or do you feel like you are living in a character or, does it change from book to book?
I feel like it can change from book to book, but I would say most often I do kind of feel like I feel like in my head it kind of like plays out like a very detailed, like almost like an animation. Like the only way I can kinda convey it is, like, I do draw sometimes, and there's just, like, this kinda, like, sketchy style, and I don't know, it's just, like, it plays in my head, and even, like, the words sometimes will play in my head, and I'll be like, "Okay, I have to phrase this a certain way as I'm writing."
I love that you envision it as an animation style. That is so cool.
Yeah.
I love that. I feel like I envision things a little bit combination of living things through the character and a little bit of seeing it outside, but I've never seen it in an animation.
A lot of people ask me about, like, face claims or, like, do you envision like, what actors do you envision as your characters? And I'm like, I don't really know and I don't really have an answer to that because I don't really envision, like, real people or I don't think of, like, specific actors as my characters. It's just, like, they come to me in, like, this, like, sketchy drawing in my head.
I know we've been talking a bit about, like the intentionality of the story and, the pacing and a lot of that. And Hallowed Be Thy Name is like a neat and compact story at around 185 pages is how it came up on my iPad that I was reading. But I'm wondering, was there anything that you cut out from earlier drafts that like pretty significant?
Yeah, there were a few intimate scenes that I had planned, like a few ideas I had that I ultimately didn't go with, mostly because I couldn't really figure out a way they fit into the progression in the story. And I'm very much like, okay, I've made my point, I've expressed these themes and they've kind of gone through their arc, so I'm gonna wrap it up.
I definitely can envision how that could have came about. When you're, like, planning your books, how tightly do you, like, outline or plan in advance versus the writing on vibes spectrum?
So my process can wildly vary depending on the book, but usually for every book, no matter like whether I have like a kind of loose outline or if I'm just flying by the seat of my pants, I'll write down the character names and I'll put like point A and point B and I'll basically be like, okay, who is this character at the point A, the start of the novel? What problems do they have? What do they want that they like can't get because of these problems or like these aspects of their character? And then point B is where I want them to be by the end of the book. And so I kind of like think about the plot, I think of okay, what can we do to get these characters from point A to point B?
I think that's a really fascinating way to go about it. I That makes complete sense. We know, or we should know, those things at the start of the book and at the end, and thinking about the character's journey and then finagling the action plot points on how do we get there. Whether someone really likes to write on vibes or they really like to detailed plot or it's a combination of both. I think that's a really like interesting framework.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually editing another manuscript right now, and that one I actually wrote the second half of the novel first. I started at the midpoint, and then I wrote until the ending, and then I went back and I wrote the beginning because basically I was kind of struggling, and I was like, I think I need to write like how these characters end up to really know like what I'm like leading toward.
That's absolutely
Yeah.
fascinating. I've never heard of someone writing the back half first, but that makes sense in a lot of ways because we have to how do we get to the end? So write the end first and then figure out how we get there. Authors really struggle at the midpoint because they know how the story starts. They have a vision for who their character is and like what they want. And then maybe they know how it ends, but the getting there is really tough. So if you start at the midpoint, then
Yeah.
you kind of can maybe mitigate some of that struggle of the midpoint.
Yeah, I will say it was a relief, like, as I'm, like, writing the beginning, be like, "Oh, I've already written half the book."
That's really cool. I'm gonna write that down because this is great. That is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, and I've never done that with any other book. It was just this one I did try to write from the beginning, but I was like, "I just really wanna write these 2 kissing." Like, I just wanna get to that part, like, the good part. Like, that's just what I wanna write, and so I'm like, "You know what? I'm gonna s" and I was like, "Okay, I need to have some self-control. I need to write in chronological order," and then I was like, "You know what? YOLO, life is short. I'm just gonna write the second half," and it worked.
I think that's really cool that you gave yourself permission to just go about it a different way, and I feel like that's a recurring themes in a lot of the authors that I'm talking to is they just write what they wanna write, and then it turns into something better than if they, like, force themselves to do it differently.
Yeah, absolutely, and I had a great time writing it, and it was definitely kind of, "Okay, I know these characters better now, since I kinda know where they're gonna end up, and I kinda have that clear vision." Yeah, and also because I know where the, like, story's going to go, I know what I need to, like, foreshadow and allude to in the earlier parts.
Yes, I definitely found that when I was writing my first manuscript, I am glad I left a little bit of room to go back and add things in, and I actually just experienced that with my current, manuscript. I've been writing it as I go and sending it to alpha readers, and I had an idea. I was like, "How do we get to the emotional payoff of these characters?" And I was like, "Something's missing here." But by giving yourself the space to, you've made sure that you have a really nice journey. It feels good when you pull that off.
Yes, it does, it feels really good.
So how long were the various, like, production stages of this? Like, how long was your kind of initial, like, brainstorming phase from when you have the idea and maybe you're, like, thinking about it rather than actively writing, and then the drafting phase, and then the editing phase? Like, how long were all of those for you?
I was daydreaming about Sebastian and Barrett for a while, like, I was just thinking about my guys. Like, the writing, it was really short, I would say it was about 2 months, and then, like, editing it, I would say, like, about 2 or 3 weeks. So, it was pretty fast.
That's so fast. I would never have guessed that. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of daydreaming, and I feel like a lot of the daydreaming sets you up for success. This does not feel like a book that took you, like, not even 4 months to write and edit. That's incredible.
I'm glad, I'm glad it doesn't feel hasty.
And I know you've written many books, and we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but was there something different that you took into the writing process for Hallowed Be Thy Name compared to your earlier works? This time around, you're like, I'm going to do something different. And if so, like, what was that?
It wasn't really much different than a lot of my other books I've written. This one I did write in chronological order, but I guess the like main thing, and I kind of talked about my writing sessions before, is like I don't tend to have like a concrete writing goal, like, oh, I need to write X amount. But I think because like I was moving and I had all this other stuff distracted me, like every day I was like, okay, I'm gonna write 1,000 words. I have like a writing journal where I keep progress and take notes. And so I feel like I was definitely a lot more disciplined with "Hallowed Be Thy Name" compared to some of my others where, I might write 300 words a day, I might write 2,000. I never really, like, kept, like, track before.
And obviously, you produced this within like a very tight turnaround. Is that something you think that you'll do going forward? Like, I mean, I think it worked out for you this time, but obviously I know it can be tough and be rigid. Like, do you think you'll stick with it?
Yeah, I try to avoid burnout, but, like, this vampire novel I'm working on that I just mentioned, that one was about, like, 2 months also. There was about a month before that was a lot of, like, outlining because that one I did, like, outline scene by scene, but that one also had a pretty quick because I'm passionate about vampires, so I wrote that one very quickly as well.
So I'm learning that like the outlining helps. I do still appreciate the flexibility and some of the like ideas that can come when you don't force yourself to be too rigid. But I do think that the rigidity is helpful in building discipline and just like getting these things done because we're obviously doing it for a reason. We want to share these stories. And that does also involve like sitting down and just like getting it done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think it's important because I think a lot of writers can think of like writing sessions and such as like, okay, I'm sitting down and I'm forcing myself to write. I think it can be better to reframe that as sometimes you don't even necessarily have to, actually write the prose. You can just be like, okay, I am going to sit down. I'm going to, daydream. I'm going to take notes. And I think that can really help a lot.
Yes, I love finding myself, like, lost in the Google of the details of the
Yeah.
world, whatever that is for someone. I love doing that, and it is still productive, right? Because you wanna make sure that your novel is well researched and it, like, fits whatever you're trying to communicate, but I love doing that. That's my favorite form of, like, procrastination. So if you were to reread this book in 10 years from now, what do you think might surprise your future self looking back on it?
The only thing that I think might really surprise me is kinda like what I alluded to is I'm just like, "Damn, how did I even get this book done?" Because a lot was happening, a lot of big major life stuff was happening in the second half of 2025. Like, it does really surprise me, like and I had another book I finished, Runaway Prince, I finished that one before that, and then I sat down, I edited both of them, I'm just like, "How did I?"
Yeah, you're like a powerhouse. You're I'm so impressed.
Yeah, so that definitely surprised me.
Neat. So
Yeah.
I very much imagine you writing Hallowed Be Thy Name on a dark and stormy night, like on a typewriter in an attic. And I know you did not because you were moving. But can you share a little bit more about like your writing environment and did it at all align with the finished product of the novel?
Yeah, somewhat. A lot of times, I'll be totally real. Sometimes I just write in bed. Like I get my laptop and I just write in bed. So but sometimes if I'm like, okay, I can't just, be in bed all day. I have to, depending on the day, I'll go out. I went out to the living room and I was like, okay, because I was moving and a lot of stuff was, like, kinda not settled, so I didn't really have, like, an actual, like, office space I could use, so I would go to the couch and be like, "Okay, this is, like, where I go to work," and I get in my head, "Okay, this is, workplace. This is workplace writing time." I'm mostly write in the evenings, and so, yeah, I'll have, like, where the room is dark, and I'll light some candles, and I'll have my book playlist, so I definitely try to get in the mood for it.
That's really fascinating. I feel like most writers that I talk to do a lot of morning writing because it's like their
Yeah.
brains are fresh. But when I was younger, I would do a lot of my creative writing and a lot of like my academic writing late at night. And so it's really, interesting that some of the vibes of the book align with the writing, but also sometimes you just have to be like, I need to find a workplace and I don't have my normal office set up because I'm moving. So like this couch is the workplace for now. So I admire
Absolutely,
that you
yeah.
found a way to make it work.
I do sometimes write in the morning. I'm not really a morning person, but sometimes there's something about just waking up and kind of being in that sleepy state where you're not, you're not hindered by a bunch of other things, and so you're just like, "Okay, I'm gonna write." So I have definitely done writing, but it was never, really, like, a proper writing session. It's just, like, I take a bunch of notes and, so some of it's really good. But, yeah, I'm mostly a night owl.
I love that. So, last question here. I know we kind of talked about the themes a little bit earlier. So, I'm wondering what is the takeaway impression that you hope that readers have after reading Hallowed Be Thy Name?
Well, I hope people enjoy the dynamic between Sebastian and Barrett, and I hope they have fun with them. But, mostly, I'm dealing with a bunch of different identities, like being trans or a queer Catholic person, and or being, in the South as a queer person, which I am. So I also hope that it can help, connect with people and maybe make them feel less isolated.
That's amazing, and that is, like, the power of literature, the power of writing, the power of art, and I love that that's the message that you want to put out, and I'm sure that readers will appreciate that. I really hope that people have that takeaway and that they enjoy it and check it out.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I will make sure to link all of those in the description so people can find your profiles online and be able to check out your books. And for those of you who are watching this who have not yet checked out Hallowed Be the Name, I highly recommend it. And if you have, I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about it in this deep dive.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for taking the time to come on and chat and letting people learn more about you and your writing process and being chill with all of my random follow up questions.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a ton of fun.